panel and also bring in from Chicago, Andy Busch, former CFTC Chief Market Intelligence Officer. Andy, I mean, we're all watching. You just heard Jessica Smith kind of running down the week there. Everybody is watching what is happening on the impeachment front, even if at this point it doesn't seem to be directly impacting the markets. What is your thinking on it from where you sit, how investors should be thinking about impeachment?
Sure. There's three things I would keep in mind. Number one, the biggest impact for the markets remains the Federal Reserve. So the Fed's easing. So as I tell my clients, stay calm and stay invested for now. That's the biggest driver. The second thing is short term, the impeachment process will take away the ability of Congress to do things like pass the USMCA, probably pass a budget. You'll just be on continuing resolutions and probably do any legislation overall. So short term, that's a negative as well. But longer term, here's where I think the markets are just way too sanguine, and I think politicians are too sanguine over this impeachment process. You never know where these things can go. You just don't know what they're going to dig up, what they're going to find. And I would say this, if this hurts President Trump and really derails his presidency, especially as it gets into the election of 2020, the markets better start paying attention much more closely to what these 2020 Democratic plans are for the economy, because they are very different and they will have significant impacts on the structure of the U.S. economy. And I don't think the stock market has taken that into consideration yet.
Just to follow up on the idea that we're going to have this absolute paralysis and that nothing else will matter except for impeachment, is there some idea that maybe, let's go to the contrarian thinking, they're going to push through more stuff because they don't want to be attacked by the president for not doing anything? I mean, Nancy Pelosi has said USMCA is moving ahead. She wants to get to yes. So in the same way where we say Trump has to have a trade deal, he wants to have something to show, maybe the Democrats are going to want to have something to show. Do you think that could possibly happen here?
Well, I think that's a good point. There's about 20 to 30 Democrats in the House that won in states that Trump carried. So they have an interest. These are the moderate Democrats that really didn't want an impeachment process to start. So they're very interested in having some kind of win to go back to their voters next fall with. So the USMCA could be a win-win for everyone, including the president. But that's where the rubber meets the road. There's a lot on the left in Nancy Pelosi's House that do not want to give the president anything, as you mentioned. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to get through this. The impeachment process certainly gives Speaker Pelosi the ability to say to people, hey, I really can't do anything. It's all about the impeachment process. We really can't bring up anything on USMCA until that's settled, as a way to actually put some additional pressure on the president and certainly on his 2020 prospects.
So the long-term risks of an impeachment process is that it could raise the likelihood that a Democrat could beat Trump. So why do you believe that markets are not really prepared for a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren victory?
Right. Well, having just gone through the top 5 candidates and written long pieces on their programs, I will tell you that the country and the markets are not really paying attention to this. These are significant shifts in so many critical policies. Energy and environment, healthcare, jobs in the economy. The reach of government back into businesses is extensive. There's a wealth tax out there. There's all sorts of things that the stock market is not going to like initially when they propose them. And just as one little side note, almost all of these candidates, the top 5, have said that on day one, they're going to execute executive orders that are going to ban fracking or ban leases for fracking activity in the United States. And just as a reminder, that's 40% of energy production in the United States. Again, I just don't see the markets paying attention to this enough.
Let me get your thoughts on this. So Bernie Sanders dropped another turd into my email inbox this morning. He wants to tax companies based on the earnings of their CEOs. And under this new Sanders proposal, I'll just read you now, McDonald's would have paid $110 million more in taxes last year. Walmart close to $800 million more in taxes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a great example of the reach that I was just talking about into the private sector and into company policies. There's a proposal out there to have a new government agency that's going to look and examine companies to give them a certificate of whether or not they have equal pay for equal work. What would that entail? That would entail maybe a commission that would go through every U.S. business and to try to make sense of whether or not they're paying people equally. I mean, that's just a small example of the reach into government. And if you look at these things, what does that mean for the markets and the economy and so on? It's throwing sand in the gears. Like, some of this stuff needs to get done. I totally understand that. Equal pay, equal justice under the law. I mean, go on the list. But when you do some of these things, the risk is that you start to throw sand in the gears and slow down the economy, and that's not good for the markets, and it's not good for job creation either.
And do you expect to see more market volatility going into the 2020 race as investors start to realize that possibly a Warren or a Sanders or a Biden might actually beat President Trump?
That is a great point. Indeed, I do. And I think we're not there yet, but I will tell you that race for 2020 is going to be very acute in the first 3 months of 2020, because by March 17th, essentially, I think the Democrats have about over 50% of their delegates pledged at that point with the primaries that are held. So just keep that in mind. Everything's accelerated into 2020. So that'll be a lot of fun. And if there is a candidate, maybe it's not a candidate that gets enough of the votes, and you could go and have an open convention come the summer, and then it really just the wheels fall off of everything as the world focuses in on who the Democrats will put forward as a nominee. And that will be a lot of fun.
All right. We'll see how it goes. Andy Busch, former CFTC Chief Market Intelligence Officer.